Over to
All
you,
right.
Prerna.
Thank you, Himanshi and Shabna, and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last session of this e-learning series, Active Mobility Systems, Pandemic and Beyond. According to the World Road Statistics 2018, out of 199 countries analyzed, India has the maximum number of road accidents and accounts for 11% of world's road accident-related deaths. 84.7% of which occurred in the economically productive age group of 18 to 60 years. India also reported a total of 17.4% pedestrian cyclist death in 2018. Research points that cities that have promoted planning for walking and cycling and have created infrastructure to support the same has seen significant increase in road safety. In India, besides road safety, lack of physical activity has also seen a growing public health concern. A pre-pandemic study by Indian Council of Medical Research revealed that less than 10% of Indians meet the World Health Organization recommendation for weekly 150 minutes of physical activity. The COVID-19 pandemic has impacted this further and has re-emphasized on the need of physical activity and availability of walking and cycling infrastructure for all. COVID-19 lockdowns imposed across the world have triggered an unprecedented change in urban mobility patterns. Many car-clogged cities witnessed record-breaking bicycle sales during the lockdowns. India saw bicycle sales multiply with nearly 5 million cycles sold between May and September 2020. Almost overnight, pedestrians and cyclists found a place of importance in urban mobility. The 11th Sustainable Development Goal and the new urban agenda aims at creating safe, accessible, inclusive, and affordable systems for cities, especially for pedestrian and cycle users. Walking and cycling, often classified together as active transportation or alternative mobility or non-motorized transport, are considered healthier modes of transportation. They're cost-efficient, clean modes with low greenhouse gas emissions. To emphasize the growing relevance of alternate mobility in this post-pandemic urban world, here this afternoon we have a panel of experts to present their views on how open streets and pop-up NMT are not just about surviving the pandemic. Instead, they are central to building sustainable cities. With this, I would like to welcome our first speaker of the day, Ashwati Dilip, Senior Project Manager, ITDP. Ashwati will speak about reclaiming streets for people. It is a national initiative that is nudging cities to prioritize cycling and walking as a mode of choice. She will also highlight the need of collaboration between governments and various expert groups to facilitate the initiative. Ashwati, over to you.
Thank you so much, Prerna. It's a pleasure to be here in this particular platform. And I'm so sorry for my slideshow is not working. And so we're going to have Himanshu sort of sharing the screen for me. So I am Ashwati Dilip, and I represent the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy. We promote walking and cycling in cities across the country at the national, state, and city levels. So moving into the next slide, it was in March 2020 that, when I was coming back from Berlin after the Transport and Climate Week, that I had no clue that in just 2 weeks' time, the entire world would come to a halt. Next slide, please. But while the world had come to a halt, walking and cycling was booming in cities across the country, like everywhere else in the world. Cycling was in huge demand, and our surveys had shown that cycling was expected to increase by 50 to 60%. Now, as Indian cities unlocked restrictions and life was getting back onto our streets, next slide, we actually got to see that motor vehicles and traffic were also coming back to our streets. Next slide. So this got us thinking that how can we support Indian cities place health and economy at the core of their COVID-19 recovery? Now, COVID-19 had highlighted the importance of streets as urban public spaces for health, recreation, and economic activities. Next slide. Now, cities across the world were showing how improving streets for walking was increasing retail sales by about 30%. New York had shown how 80,000 jobs during COVID-19 was saved through the Open Streets program, and making streets safer and livable for children also had benefits for health, air quality, and congestion. Next slide. Now, over the years, we've been in India for the last 20 years and working with cities across the country. We know that a few Indian cities had already begun reimagining its streets. Next slide. From vehicular conduits into paradises for people. Now, there are a whole bunch of nonprofit organizations working in cities across the country, trying to sort of help them transform themselves. But the change or the transformation has remained quite low if we had to speak about it. So the thought process that we were continuously sort of brainstorming was, how can we support all Indian cities quickly transform their streets into walking and cycling havens? How can we give them a sense of what does streets feel like when you transform them for walking and cycling? And with this vision, we launched the National Walking and Cycling Programs called the India Cycles for Change Challenge and the Streets for People Challenge in collaboration with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs and the Smart Cities Mission. Next slide. So here, what we embraced, or the approach that we embraced, was one of testing, learning, and scaling. We encourage cities to test temporary, low-cost interventions for them to get an understanding of how spaces can transform. Then use the learnings from the pilots to create scale-up proposals and build support for walking and cycling. So bringing together citizens at large to support this change. Now, next slide. While we were moving through every part of this particular challenge, we really wanted to work with the citizens, by the citizens, and for the citizens. And here we aimed to get our cities to host focus group discussions and perception surveys to listen to our citizens, map their issues by having handlebar surveys, which were surveys on cycles with the citizens, and doing site surveys as well, and then creating design solutions by hosting design competitions. Next slide. Now, once the cities had worked on their phase one of testing, learning, and scaling up, now in the next stage, we're working with the cities to scale up their efforts for the long term. So the stage 2 of these challenges focus on implementing the scale-up proposal, working with the cities and adopting non-motorized transport policy and allocating budget for the implementation of the scale-up proposal, and establishing a supportive institutional framework such as building healthy street cells, as well as committees to ensure long-term sustainability of this project, even in the absence of these national challenges. Next slide. This brings us to the question, how did cities actually embrace the national programs? If you go into the next slide, more than 100 cities across the country have embraced walking and cycling challenges. Next slide. And the success of this challenge has been that we've been able to work with over 600 civil society organizations spread across the country. The truth, or the big, aha moment for us was that we as individuals can only create so much change. But if you're able to collaborate and work with citizen groups in the cities that we want to transform, then the change can be a lot more. We then captured concerns of over 60,000 citizens across the country through perception surveys and discussions. Next. We also engaged thousands of citizens for campaigns and events. One, very important concern that we always heard from cities is that we're creating all of this infrastructure for walking and cycling, but the question mostly is, where are the pedestrians, where are the cyclists? So it's very important, and we worked with citizens and cities to have various campaigns and events promoting walking and cycling. Next slide. We also encourage cities to sort of host city-led design competition, which encourage designers from their local cities to engage in the process of creating design solutions for their cities. And it was fantastic because in the next slide, you will notice that we were able to bring together over 2,000 participants. Next slide, please. And these were young designers, students, and experienced designers from across the country coming together to become the army of urban transformers who aim to transform cities and make them safe for walking and cycling. Next slide. Now, as we went into creation of, as we went into going into what is the safe intervention that's required, if you could just go one slide back, I think you missed a slide. What we did realize is that, okay, that's fine, sure, no problem. So just to speak about it, what we also realized that when we did our surveys, that it's not just interventions, it's also things like cycle training camps that women needed. Many women did not know how to cycle, so they needed cycle training camps. Some, a lot of people had cycles which needed to be repaired, so there needed to be cycle repair clinics. So these were all multiple interventions that cities did embrace beyond the pilot transformation. Cities identified about 400 kilometers for pilot transformation. Next slide. This is a slide from Bangalore, and in the next slide you will see the pilot intervention that was done by the city of Coimbatore as well. Next slide. Cities learned from these pilots, and with these learnings, as you can see here, it's a city of Kohima that you see towards your left. And if you go to the next slide, they used all of these learning to put together scale-up plans of what needs to happen next and how they can expand. One, to convert the temporary interventions into permanent interventions, but also to how they can expand across the city. Next slide. Now, while they were developing these scale-up plans, it was also important to embed them into a healthy streets policy. So cities are now adopting a healthy streets policy, and here are the 10 pillars of the healthy streets policy. Next slide. We were also working with the cities on how to build institutional resilience through the creation of healthy streets cells and healthy streets committees. So this has been our journey so far with the cities. And if I could just say how we as the program supported Indian cities, next slide. One is that we provided technical assistance to the cities through workshops. Next, in the next slide, you'd see how we've been able to give them technical assistance through resources, multiple resources, starting from design guidelines to even how you would send a media article out to how you would host a perception survey. All of these really step-by-step guidance was shared with the cities. We also established a collaboration and coordination platform to encourage cities to learn from one another, which was a fantastic experience through this particular process, seeing Chandigarh help Kochi and Bangalore help Surat and so on. Next slide. And all of this work has really helped us in paving new national programs as well. One that we've already launched is the Transport for All, and we're also looking to host a Buses for All program. So this has been our journey of creating happy cities through healthy streets. And once again, I'd just like to reinforce that the aha moment for us is that alone we can only do so much, but together we can do much, much more. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Ashwati. This is a remarkable, step that you guys have, ventured on, and 100 cities, 600 citizen groups is an amazing number. Where we kind of often hear that how we should include communities, how we should bring them on board and stuff like that. I think this is already happening, and it's an example for others to see. We will come back with more questions to you, but I'm going to move to the next speaker. The next speaker is Sonal Kulkarni, Senior Transport Planner, Directorate of Urban Land Transport. She will be sharing about Bengaluru NMT journey, and will also showcase key initiatives by DULT on walking and cycling during pandemic. She will also touch upon the role of government sector to achieve active mobility in cities. Over to you, Sonal.
Thank you. Thank you, Prerna. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So I'd just like to start by saying that good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sonal Kulkarni. I'm a senior transport planner and also now the head of Center for Research and Innovation at the Directorate of Urban Land Transport. So the Directorate of Urban Land Transport is one of a kind organization. It's a state level nodal agency at the state government level of Karnataka. And its main focus and mandate is to plan, design, implement, and fund sustainable urban mobility initiatives across cities in Karnataka. So just to move on to our history of enabling cycling in Bengaluru. Pandemic was so before pandemic, I would like to say that DALT has been working continuously on engaging with the citizens and also to plan for sustainable mobility in Bengaluru and other parts of the state. One such, some of the initiatives that we have started off much before the COVID-19 hit us was the tender shop projects. I'm sure everyone has heard of it. It was one of the kind projects where the city actually took up streets and they redesigned it to actually give more priority to pedestrians. And also give uniform carriageway and beautify the streets in the central business district in Bangalore. And then we also started something called the Cycle Day in 2013. We had actually just started, planning for cycle tracks in neighborhoods in Bengaluru. And that's when some of the NGOs and partners from the city came across and told us that it's very important to actually do engagement before implementation. So that sort of hit chords with us, and we understood that it's very important to actually build this kind of ownership within the citizens of actually owning the infrastructure that will be built in the future, especially around cycling. And the Cycle Day initiative has grown from strength to strength. So it started off as a once a month initiative every Sunday, and now like just before COVID, it was conducted in like many neighborhoods every Sunday, and hosted by the resident welfare associations in that particular neighborhood. So it's become a very sustainable initiative just on the lines of Cyclovia. And then DOLT also passed a legislation where the Karnataka Non-Motorized Transport Agency was set up in 2018. And again, it's one of its kind, whose primary focus is to actually build infrastructure around non-motorized transport in cities across Karnataka. And then we did the public bicycle sharing system in Bengaluru, and then the Green Link scheme came up, which is like a funding scheme by DOLT for cities across Karnataka to build more pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. And of course, there are some private initiatives like the Cycle to Work by the bicycle mayor of Bengaluru, which was also like we calculated as a part of the history of whatever has been done in Bengaluru. So moving on, all of us know that COVID-19 hit us in 2020, and then DALT found this as the perfect opportunity to actually do some pilots and showcase some initiatives. So a corridor pilot was chosen on Outer Ring Road, and a pop-up bicycle lane was put in place in less than 5 months. I mean, there are some improvements that are going on happening, but it's one of its kind pop-up bicycle infrastructure that has been put up in the city. Then we also showcased a different kind of a pilot where we integrated the bicycle infrastructure with the pedestrian infrastructure in the smart city area of Bengaluru, which is sort of the core of Bengaluru. And next, we also piloted interventions, which are tactical interventions to see how we can, yes, Brenda.
Sonal, if you're moving your PPT, the screen is frozen. We don't see that PPT moving.
Okay, let me just stop sharing and share it again.
Yeah.
Are you able to see it now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So we also, as I was saying, we also did some neighborhood pilot interventions in the form of tactical interventions to see and test some of the solutions that we had designed for making streets safer for cyclists and pedestrians. And we did it with the people. So yeah, so scaling up some of these pilot interventions to see how we can build a chain of collaboration with the citizens. As I said, like DALT believes in the ethos of building with the people. So that's how it started Cycle Day 1.0, which is an open streets initiative. And then even during even during the pilot intervention, we actually crowdsource information on cycle routes that can be taken up through our Mark Your Cycle Routes, initiative, where people actually rode along routes and sent us routes which they generally use while either for their daily commute or their any other purposes. And then we had data-led decision making, which we got data from the Cycle to Work platform, from PBS data, proposal from various local communities. And then again, we did some design charrettes with the neighborhood to actually, finalize proposals. And we are also doing an initiative, which is an extension of Cycle Day 2.0, because currently in the COVID-19 situation, we're not able to do the Cycle Day in its original format. So now we are engaging with around 7 communities to do something called the Sustainable Urban Mobility Accords, where we are giving the community RWA 50 lakh rupees to actually come up with proposals and implement them in their respective neighborhoods. So yeah, as I said, like the pop-up lanes were planned with the people, the cyclists were there, the police were there, all the major government stakeholders were present during the recce. And then, of course, like there were a lot of recce's done, site inspections to retrofit bicycle lanes with sidewalks. The Mark Your Cycle routes, which was which became very popular, and many people actually sent in their routes to us to actually, and then we prioritize it based on like the number of routes that have been showcased by as many people. So these were some of the outcomes of the crowdsourced. And we had like during this whole, the India Cycles for Change Challenge, which Ashwati spoke about, which even Bangalore was part of. We did many such roundtable discussions along with WRI between public and the government. We did rides for safety and engaged more and more people to come out and ride and use the infrastructure that we're building. The cyclists also provided inputs for designing of the infrastructure. And as I was saying, like all the infrastructure that was built was actually led by data, and either it be the PBS data that we have received, or any other data that we had hands on. We actually use that to make decisions to actually come up with routes and planning for the cycle tracks and pedestrian infrastructure. We've also done, so I just want to showcase some of the data that was used for coming up with the, and how we used it to actually, build this kind of a map, which is a cycling district map for the whole of Bangalore. And then we also went ahead and did a uniform branding for the state of Karnataka for cycling. So we have now a brand manual logo called Trin, and that's what we're using in all our signages, our lane markings, and all of that. So we, all of this was also fueled by innovation. So we brought in that element of innovation because we wanted the market and the public also to think about solutions for making infrastructure better. That adds another layer of ownership and enthusiasm from the public and the market side. So as I was speaking about the Sustainable Urban Mobility Accords, where we are supporting 7 communities at 50 lakh rupees. Right now, we are at a stage where we have done some data analysis, and the reports have been shared with the community, and we are now helping them with designing of proposals and strategies for their neighborhood. So some innovations were also done by the BMTC, which is our transport corporation in Bengaluru, where they actually piloted some bicycle racks on their buses. And then we had the sort of very famous initiative called the Clean Air Street Testbed, which we actually did on a newly infrastructured street in Bangalore called Church Street. I'm sure many of you have heard of Church Street, which was actually built to be a pedestrian only street. And we actually took this opportunity to, as part of this test bed, pedestrianize the street every weekend for around 6 months to actually see what are the, what are the quality of life measures that we will get from pedestrianizing a street. And also we trialed out many innovative, electric micro-mobility solutions on the street where, people got to actually try it out, give feedback to the innovators, and so that the innovators can actually go back and, tweak their products and bring it back to the market. So yeah, I mean, it was packed with loads of fun. A lot of people actually appreciated this initiative, and even today, actually, people ask us to bring it back and pedestrianize that street on a daily basis. So some of the other innovative initiatives that we took up was we called for designs for actually bicycle separators, and these are the finalists that were chosen amongst all the people who participated. So these will be now actually we will be giving them grants to actually put them on some of the cycle tracks that we have designed in in Bengaluru. And another facility that we actually funded or gave grant to was this thing called the pedal port, which is actually a solution that we're putting up in various parts of the city for cyclists to actually use it for repairs and use these tools for repairs and repairing their puncture and things like that. So with this, I just want to say that, like, yeah, it's been a very exciting journey, and it's filled with a lot of not only infrastructure, but also planning with the people, doing a lot of innovations, and including the market in this whole initiative. So it's been an exciting past 1 year for all of us promoting cycling and walking in cities.
Thank you, Sonal. This is a incredible journey that you shared with us. Clearly, Bengaluru has made it a priority to bring NMT in a full throttle situation for the city, and I think rightly so. The only thing that kind of does come back is it took a pandemic to kind of really step up to this this kind of commitment. But nevertheless, it's better to be to be on this track than never. So I think with this, I'm going to definitely circle back with a couple of questions to you on the nuances that are associated with such a large landmark sort of initiative by the city. Moving ahead, I'm going to invite Rajiv Malagi, Manager, Sustainable Cities and Transport, WRI-India. The Bengaluru story does not end with Sonal's presentation. Rajiv will be speaking about the pop-up lane project of Bengaluru and how smart cities and smart cities NMT model road project that has been taken up in collaboration with WRI and DULT and smart cities. So Rajiv, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Prerna. And can you see my screen and hear me well?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, fine, yeah. No, I agree with Prerna, and it's just very interestingly turned out to be, the Bangalore taking the hotspot today for all our discussions with these examples overlapping with each of our presentations. So bear with me, you might see a few similar slides to what Sonal has shown recently in her presentation now. But I would probably try to just bring in a slightly different angle, more touching upon the city, but as well as what is the current status of cycling in the country, as well as especially with the pandemic lens over here. With that, my topic is pop-up to permanent, where I'm essentially talking about two main projects. One is the pop-up lane, which happened in the outer ring road in the Bangalore city. But at the same time, some of these learnings got translated to make a few permanent implementation measures in the central business district of Bangalore. So just to also talk about what happened, this is something with the pandemic context as well. But in a larger sense, when we take cycling as a mode of transport in Indian cities, it's most of the time, in an earlier sense, it was always related to the economic class as a primary, kind of parameter, and usually, a lot of people cycling for a need-based, requirement was relatively less, especially for the middle class and the upper middle class. However, that image has started to change in the recent years. There are a lot of people who are, who have started to cycle for their day-to-day needs as well, and it's not just the lower income community as well. And when the pandemic hit, this whole need based aspect for cycling also kicked in. And this is one of the examples of Bangalore where the whole concept of relief riders came in, where a bunch of cyclists started to supply day-to-day essentials for the residents of the city, probably in the area which they stay in, on a radius of 5 to 10 kilometers, within that sort of a thing. That actually also led us to this opportunity of working on a pop-up lane project, with the whole necessity that there is pandemic coming in, and cycling and walking is taking prominence. So what can we do in the city to sort of provide that kind of a quick infrastructure for people to cycle along the street? The other background to this story also is that this particular road is on the outer ring road. This stretch is about 17 kilometers in length. But interestingly, this is also dotted with a number of IT tech parks and offices. So a lot of people were already cycling along this road. However, they felt that it would be interesting to have something more dedicated as a lane to improve the safety for cyclists. So if you sort of see in this picture towards the right, it is the dedicated bus lane which already exists after the in the regular vehicular lane, and this is the service road. So the idea was, there was already a 6 meter sort of a width, which is almost more than for two vehicles to pass through. So the intent was to sort of scoop out a part of the space, about 1.5 meters width, which is for a one-way cycling stretch. And similarly, the same module would be repeated on the other side of the road as well. That still left enough room for the vehicles to still drive through this, and 4.5 meters still comfortable width for two vehicles to cut across as well. That also led to an inclusive approach, where it was not just done as an infrastructural project where we just had the designs and adopted them and implemented them over there, but it was more through a series of discussions with different kinds of stakeholders, right from the locals, the police commissioner, who is also an avid cyclist, and there were cyclists who were already riding along the stretch, so sort of bring them in even for the site visits as well as the design development. And even while decision making, the necessary feedbacks were taken to understand which are the best best stretches to choose, as well as where the crossings need to happen, what do we do at the junctions, and so on and so forth. From that kind of a success, where once we installed the pop-up lanes and there were certain learnings developed, there was also a bicycling committee formed in the city, which consisted of bicycle enthusiasts and other kind of government and expert group representatives, in which the MD of Smart City was also, started to get involved as a part of this particular group. And she suggested that, while there are these streets already being developed in the central business district as a part of Smart City initiative, why don't we try to integrate the idea of cycle track, to bring a holistic approach for this street, and also to make it an empty priority street along these stretches. So what we did was, we took about 3 to 4 roads as model roads and demonstrated these kind of proposals, which had the right kind of material, right kind of designs and buffers, but also gave enough room and also built in some sense of safety for the vehicular passengers as well. These were a few examples in terms of the design proposals were given, and how right from pedestrians to cyclists to even motorists, everyone was sort of prioritized through the right kind of design. And even with respect to decision making process, it was again talking to the internal team, but as well as the site engineers who were there to understand what are the complexities on ground, and what are the necessary modifications we need to make as a part of the proposals. But while I'm talking about Bangalore as a context, we also kind of zoomed out to just broadly understand, what is the issue happening, to also talk about people not being able to cycle, as much as, we're looking at infrastructure being provided in the city. But if you see this particular graph, it also shows that if there is a long distance or end-to-end commute which is required, a majority of percentage of economically weaker section would prefer to just use cycle as a complete mode for end-to-end commit, rather than shifting multiple modes. But with that, it also comes to the challenge where a lot of people don't even have access to cycles at a basic level. So even for them to own a cycle still remains a challenge, and the country needs to have, or the cities rather need to have those kind of measures in a way we can make sure that each one of them also gets to access this particular mode. And the city has been taking a few steps and initiatives in a way that these multiple modes could be integrated as well, so that if I'm commuting for about, let's say, 15 or 20 or 30 kilometers in the city, or from one end to other end of the city, it's not cycling as always option. I need to think and worry about cycling long distances. But is there a way we can look at these kind of integrations where either I can clamp my cycle onto a rack into a bus, or even carry a foldable cycle into a metro, and finish my longer leg of journey through these mass transits, but at the same time finish my first and last mile connectivity with my cycle. So the city is already trying to explore these kind of options which are critical. So this is the present, kind of a challenge which we are facing, and I felt, as much as we are talking about proposals, it's not a pretty picture to say that everything is done and it's nice and good, and we never go back and see how the project is actually functioning. But it's rather important to sort of monitor the project to understand, has it been really successful or not, or what else has to be changed or modified in order to improve improve the quality or capacity of cyclists along these stretches. So if you see here, this is still an intermediate stage where the signages have still not been put, the floor marking has not been put, and it is of course in process, which is happening for this particular lane. But it also led to a lot of two-wheelers and motorists entering into this lane, assuming that it was actually a dedicated lane for motorists. So we did feel that there's a big gap in terms of not only just putting first level of infrastructure, but right kind of signage and messaging also starts sort of becoming important for the city. So it started with one looking at designing and installing the necessary signages wherever it was required, and that is of course in process. So we still see a lot of news articles recently being published that it's not been a successful project, and because it all goes hand in hand, right from infrastructure to right kind of awareness and the cyclists using it at the same time, how the right kind of communication happens for non-cyclists in a way that they don't start owning the cycle tracks as for their respective modes. But at the same time, it also led to creating certain awareness programs and reaching out to people to sort of tell that there are these cycle tracks available, and it have to be used efficiently. It's the same picture which I showed earlier, but just to also indicate that as much as there are people who are using it, there was a requirement for those kind of change makers or influential influence or key decision makers or influencing members of the city to sort of take decisions or rather take stands of what has to go into these kind of projects. Finally, just the third part, talking about the idea of building back better. I would like to just say that as much as we talk about these projects and see this as infrastructural entity, there is much more than that, which happens where it has to start, with people as the center. But as much as, there is supporting infrastructure which exists, there are other components also which have to be addressed, right? From policies around cycling in terms of how it reflects back to a scaled up version of the city, and how the right kind of regulations and policies have to start falling in place in a way that it gets reflected onto the necessary infrastructure on ground. But at the same time, there is necessary planning and budgeting which happens, and then there is active engagement and awareness building which is required, because if you just have infrastructure but no people cycling on that, which again is really doesn't contribute to the success of the project. And of course, ensuring safety, and security for the cyclists along this stretch. And to just look at the kind of a scale up version, we went right from a spot level infrastructure where we did pop-up lanes, and there are these different tools where we use tactical urbanism as an intervention tool to translate that into a permanent implementation. So cities have a huge potential to do something of this sort, where we can test something and eventually make it permanent. And Ashwati and Sonal have also sort of highlighted on these aspects already, but also looking at kind of interactions. And this one specifically was all women group, kind of an interaction to understand what women cyclists feel in the city, to sort of cycle, and what concerns them to rather use or not use cycling as a mode. And also looking at a national level, where we need to think of a national level workshops, and events and activities, and definitely ITTP has taken up the whole streets for people and other national initiatives, which is eventually trickling down to city level interventions. And with that, I just wanted to close my presentation saying that creating a livable city is not only about moving mobility systems, but also about creating momentum in people to adopt it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. I think as much as your presentation spoke about creation of infrastructure and the right size and opportunity for the vulnerable groups, but it also spoke about the bigger challenge of change, that behavioral change that we are looking for, where the challenges that we face today in our cities are at least mitigated, if not completely omitted. So I think it's a good start, and I hope that an example like Bengaluru can actually become a reference point for many other cities who are currently grappling with how to go about doing this entire intervention, especially when the cities are in place and there are related nuances that needs to be taken care of. I think with this, I'm going to move to the last panelist for the day, Sonal Shah, Executive Director, Center for Sustainable and Equitable Cities. She will be sharing her learnings from global responses to active mobility in COVID-19 pandemic. The emphasis of her conversation will be on how the momentum on active mobility during the pandemic can be sustained in short and medium term. And over to you, Sonal.
Thank you so much, Prerna, and thank you to NIUA and WRI for this opportunity. I'm very happy to have my previous panelists set the context in India, and I think that some of the learnings that we will get from other cities might find resonance, if you will. So just let me share my screen. Yeah, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. So I'd just like to kind of share that in around July of last year in 2020, the high volume transport applied research program introduced a call for proposals on looking at COVID-19 and using it as an opportunity to promote sustainable mobility. So I, along with 4 other researchers, looked at different modes of urban transport, and my colleague Vishnu and I from the Urban Catalysts specifically looked at non-motorized transport, that is walking and cycling. And our objective through this research, which was conducted from November of 2020 to about June of 21, aimed to understand what were the key levers that had enabled cities to use the pandemic as an opportunity to prioritize walking and cycling. And we also wanted to understand how would these learnings then provide strategic guidance to cities in India on building and scaling walking and cycling infrastructure. What we had done is our process had involved an overview of looking at cities globally and identifying what the key levers are. So I'll very briefly go over through what these are. We identified about 8 levers which looked at institutional framework, be it coordination for non-motorized transport, capacity within government agencies, financing for walking and cycling infrastructure, the role of leadership and political will, the role of policy and regulatory frameworks, as well as plans, strategies, and technical resources. Very importantly, the role of civil society and the private sector, and communications, messaging, and outreach. And what we did is that it's also important to understand that when we look at the world and we look at examples, what kind of knowledge are we getting in terms of which cities are doing what, right? And when we looked at some research that was conducted and released in August of, up until August of 2020, we found that a majority of the interventions that were recorded were in North America, Europe, and Central Asia, right? So therefore, it is very easy for us to know about a Paris, a London, a Milan, but we still will not know about interventions that are, for example, happening in low and middle income countries. And I think this was also one of the gaps that we wanted to fill in terms of trying to understand that if we had to look at levers, what did a comparison across cities from high income and low and middle income countries offer us? Some of the interesting things that we noticed, and if you look on the right, is when they began to document the kind of measures that were being implemented, we see that a majority of these included, for example, expanding street space for walking or cycling, or banning of motor vehicles as 2 key kind of important interventions. In Europe, we saw that about 75% of the interventions focused on expanding or creating cycle lanes and cycle tracks, along with 20% of interventions focused on traffic calming and reduction. So which case studies did we look at? So after a global review, we looked at 4 case studies or case cities to do a deep dive into. We looked at the cities of Addis Ababa, the Bogota, London, and Bangalore. So very happy to kind of see Bangalore being discussed here. And we reached out, in fact, we reached out to all the panelists in this webinar as well, and also had the opportunity to speak to, some of them in terms of kind of understanding the levers that had enabled these cities to implement walking and cycling infrastructure. In the interest of time, I will only focus on 2, Bogota and London, for 2 reasons. One, because I think these case studies are in a sense well known, and then so we may not need to go into a lot of detail about them. And also because Bangalore has already been discussed to a fair extent as well. So very quickly, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this provides a timeline which identifies what has been done in Bogota since the 1970s up until 2016, and also until 2021, which is under the mayorship of Claudia Lopez. So very quickly, and what we did is we divided the levers into what we call the supply levers and the demand levers, right? So we wanted to understand is that when governments had to provide walking and cycling infrastructure, what were the levers that worked in particular cities? And I'm going to highlight a few of them, right? So particularly in the case of Bogota, and we know, for example, of the role of cyclovia, which we also identify as a demand lever, because the organizing of cyclovia actually institutionalized a culture of cycling in the city, even if it was cycling for recreation. However, as is commonly misunderstood, that cyclovia was being organized since the 1970s, what we found is that in the late 1990s, it was reorganized such that one institute, which is the Institute of Sports and Recreation, became responsible for organizing cyclovias in Bogota. It was then headed by Gil Peñalosa at the time. And what did he also do is that he made an active attempt to involve civil society organizations, but also tap into private sector fundings to the extent that close to 25% of cyclovia's financing comes from this source. What it allowed Bogota to do is expand cyclovia not only in the well-off neighborhoods of the city, but also create a network of 120 kilometers, right? So it allowed, this money allowed them to hire volunteers, get guards that are responsible for maintaining and organizing this event to such a scale on a weekly basis. So that was one on cyclovia side. And in the institutional framework, we see that is the Institute of Recreation and Sports. We have the Secretariat of Mobility, which is the nodal agency for mobility, and it has a dedicated team for non-motorized transport within it. It also has the Institute of Urban Development, which over a period of time, since the late 90s, if we will, specialized in construction of streets as well as maintenance of them. So it's not a design agency, but it has acquired a skill for construction and maintenance. In terms of, and I'm going to do very select pieces over here, if that is okay. The very important piece that will be relevant in addition to the policy framework, the planning, was the financing, as well as talking about a continuity in leadership. So we had Antonis Mokus, as well as Peñalosa, and before them, a continuity in leadership to extend and go, to expand the network and build on the network created by others. Over the last few years, we have not seen, we have also seen some of these face challenges, but the interesting piece was this continuity. And to the point, which might be interesting when we think about leadership and political will, is that Bogota, like London, which I will come to, has a dedicated NMT commissioner who is responsible for becoming the champion for walking and cycling in the city. That person is not a technical person per se, but becomes the face, provides the political will, and also becomes responsible in a way to coordinate between different agencies. The third aspect that I would really like to highlight is the role of civil society. Civil society has different roles to play, and the cyclovia have been organized with cycling groups in the city. Interestingly, what has also happened in Bogota, and you will see that in London as well, is that experts within civil society often also go into government in order to kind of extend that vision into government and, as well, so that they can continue to provide the needed technical support. So very, very, very quickly, I just wanted to highlight that one of the key demand levers was the organizing of cyclovia on a regular basis by a government authority using different kinds and sources of funds, right, in order to organize this event on a weekly basis. And I'll just kind of highlight some of the key levers like I have mentioned here. The opportunity of the COVID-19 pandemic was that the history of building. So pre-COVID, Bogota already had about 550 kilometers of cycling lanes in the city, and they had been organizing cyclovia for a while as well. So they had the tender processes, specifications in place. The contractors were trained, which allowed them to implement, fast. However, we are seeing some challenges as well, because there has been a pushback against some of these interventions. And like I mentioned, that there is a dependence, if you will, on the mayor for coordination as well. One thing that I did not mention is that with the current mayor, Claudia Lopez, she brought in a specific perspective on gender, but also safety and security in order to ensure that the cycling network is safe. Coming to London, I, again, won't go into too much detail. One thing that we see across these two cities is that this has taken time, right? If you see the timeline from London, it starts from 2000 with Ken Livingstone, we had Boris Johnson, and then now we have Sadiq Khan, right? So we have, again, in this case, a continuity of mayors over the last 10 years who have sought to build walking and cycling infrastructure in the city. Now, we do understand TfL, the Transport for London, as this, this coordinating authority, but we should remember that even TfL is only responsible for the major roads in the cities. And it also has to coordinate with boroughs. So the boroughs are responsible and own a majority of the street network. So Transport for London also has to work with the city council in the boroughs in order to ensure a continuous network as well. So just want to acknowledge that. Again, what do we see? What are the key supply levers? One is it has benefited that you have one agency responsible for transport in the city. The Surface Transport Division again has a dedicated team for non-motorized transport. And the way that TfL incentivizes boroughs is often through technical guidance and through financing. So one example that I may use is the Transport for London worked with some of the outer boroughs in the city in order to implement what it called the mini Holland schemes. And these were aimed in order to introduce traffic calming measures, but also to create safer junctions and cycling infrastructure in the boroughs. And the key aspect of this was evidence, which I think we still have to see in Indian cities, very clear evidence of what was the situation before and what was the improvement after in order to increase adoption by other boroughs in the city as well. I'll just highlight some of the key aspects here. We do know, I think this is very well known, the role that the central government played through the gear change program. And it committed about £2 billion for non-motorized transport. And the interesting thing over here is that, when Boris Johnson became the prime minister, his work on NMT at the city level then kind of scaled to the national level. So One of the other things that you see, for example, and I will not underscore enough the role of financing in being able to uh, increase the increased willingness to implement walking and cycling infrastructure. The other aspect that I would really, and what we are seeing in TFL is that the walking and cycling funding is primarily coming through national grants. There are some challenges related to center and city because they both belong to different political parties, but and this is a challenge, but the most of the funding has come through national grants. One key aspect that I would also like to mention is multiple cities in the UK have begun to create walking and cycling commissioners. London has it, Manchester has it, again, who report directly to the mayor, but whose role is to become that icon for walking and cycling in the city. A very interesting model that we're seeing in London, and I suspect many cities in the UK, is the role of civil society. So we see that one, they not only provide technical support, they are also custodians of infrastructure. So some not-for-profit organizations are responsible for the maintenance of UK's cycling network, which I think is a very interesting model to consider. They also provide consulting services on the planning and design of non-motorized transport, particularly at the borough level, right, to the city council in the boroughs. And another interesting model that we are seeing is that in addition to the organizing of car-free days and other events, multiple organizations have tied together to create a walking and cycling alliance that has then been able to negotiate very key changes in the highway codes, in reviewing the gear change program, and so on and so forth. And I think this could be another learning for us in India as well. I think Ashwati already spoke about the healthy streets approach, which was pioneered by London in under Mayor Sadiq Khan. So I won't kind of go into that, but I think I will share one image which is really important. So what are the key levers? Continuity in the focus on cycling as well as walking, linking individual and public health, right? So this is not only about individual health, but what is the impact on active travel on public health and public expenditure is what the Healthy Streets approach does. A dedicated walking and cycling team within TFL and civil society organizations who both provide technical support and consulting services. I have spoken about the role of evidence that they have used in showing the benefits of the infrastructure, and very actively the national government and the city government have provided funding which is tied to the Healthy Streets approach. Just very quickly on the threats, we are seeing, like I mentioned, a reliance on national grants for walking and cycling and varying attitudes on this from the boroughs. So this is an image that actually I think exemplifies what I've been trying to say, is that it's part of the Healthy Streets approach, which not only shows the impact on individual health, but then will also go on to share impact on public health and public expenditure. Very briefly, what are the learnings for India? And I think some of these have already been shared by my previous panelists, but I'll just highlight some of the key pieces that I think our literature review, our interviews with over, I think, 20 to 25 experts globally, and validation with them has shown. One is the data. Our pedestrians and cyclists are a silent majority, and we need to publish annual reports on walking and cycling. Our cities currently, through the Smart Cities mission, have a wide network of surveillance cameras. Can we not use these CCTV cameras to provide us this data and information on walking and cycling, which was not possible before? organizing and sustained events. And I think sustenance is important. We have a very interesting model in Bangalore where the approach is more decentralized, right? Versus Bogota, which had a state agency leading this. One of the big pieces that we are seeing, particularly in India, where there is low capacity within government officials vis-a-vis non-motorized transport, and often the decision makers on sustainable transport, if you will, or walking and cycling, don't necessarily use these modes. So it is important to involve them when these events are organized, so that they understand and they can also personalize what the experience of a pedestrian and cyclist is. I had spoken about the link between active mobility, individual health, so that individuals feel like we need to do this, and not only from an economic need. We have already spoken about walking and cycling action plans. I think Ashwati did mention this, having very clear goals and targets. And then one of the ways to kind of, make this a priority is to link these to outcomes on health, right? We have not seen road safety I think it's being used in some cities. I think Mumbai is doing it. But our approach to road safety to a large extent is still focused on black spot rectification. And it would be interesting to see how it could be leveraged better to redesign streets for walking and cycling. I think there's an opportunity in the smart city SPVs to see how their teams and the capacity can be built into becoming dedicated teams for non-motorized transport, and ensure that cities either create street design guidelines that are relevant to their context. In some cities, and I know this is a challenge for Bangalore, that different agencies have their own street design guideline. The city has not adopted one guideline. So there are different standards depending on which organization is proposing a project. So that is the challenge of civil society participation in the absence of a uniform street design guideline. I think Raji spoke about the creation of, I think even Ashwati did, about the creation of non-motorized transport committees that take decisions on the non-motorized transport plan, etc. Very quickly, in terms of financing and funding channels, I think one of the biggest maybe limitations we are seeing is any clear budget allocation from the national government or on walking and cycling in the post-COVID-19 context. It's encouraging to hear that DULT is making some initiatives on that side. When we are talking about capacity building, I think some of these we may already know, which is combining experiential learning with technical learning, primarily, like I said, because most of our decision makers don't actually use these modes of transport. Peer-to-peer learning, I think this is already being done. And I think just learning a little bit from Bangalore as well, when we are looking at pilot projects, the first set of tender shop projects was bold, right? Where they took seven roads in the city center to demonstrate what it would take and how the street could transform. So this has a way of ensuring that we don't take short stretches as pilot projects, but we are really able to try and push for slightly bolder pilot projects, taking support not only from bureaucrats and civil society, but also involving politicians. We still have to use data and evidence for before and after implementation. We are not seeing that. We're looking forward to some results from the Church Street initiative and encouraging behavioral change. I think this was also highlighted by Rajiv. Thank you. Just want to say that these guidelines have been published with NIUA and are also available on their website, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonal, for an elaborate presentation. I think, this whole tie-up on how the global examples can then be contextualized for Indian cities is an interesting requirement, because that's where a lot of our stakeholders come back and say that fine, this is happening in another part of the world, and we don't know how to kind of do this for our own geography. But I think that's well covered in your conversation. And I think one of the important aspects that came across is the whole conversation of continued leadership. I think this makes a very, very big difference. And we have seen, in our experience, we've seen initiatives taking a back seat, when things change, and, when there is a shift in or transition in the leadership. But I think over a period of time, we have also seen that there is a bit of an acceptance on, how we are looking at certain urban transformations, like, strengthening the NMT infrastructure in Indian cities. It's not something that is new to India, but, it's just that we are reviving it in sorts, and, we're trying to kind of strengthen it in ways with new technology, new measures, new reforms. And I think that's an interesting, and it's interesting to look at how different cities are, really taking that initiative. Clearly, Bengaluru is the talk of the town, and I think the city has really taken up this entire initiative very well. And definitely we're looking forward to see more, and also how Bangalore will inspire other cities in India, and can become an example for reference, and maybe visits, and then let's see how this pans out moving forward. So with this, we actually are in our Q&A session, and we have a couple of questions here. So let me start with those questions, and then maybe I can feed my curiosity a little. So the first question I have is for Rajiv. Rajiv, there is a question for: does human psychology or behavior of walking and cycling also taken into consideration while designing the cycle infrastructure or pop-up lanes? If yes, then how did you really consider it while you were designing or preparing for it?
Yeah, thanks, Prerna, and yeah, thanks for that question as well. I think that answer to that is definitely yes. But as much as this psychology can be considered as a part of your key standpoints and key parameters when you're designing these lanes and tracks and other necessary infrastructure, but it has to be correlated with situation on ground and what are we going to do eventually as an end product, for this given kind of a scenario. If you have to talk specifically about the outer ring road, if I look at this project through a human behavior point of view or a cyclist point of view, maybe I think it might require much more reach. Let's say there are neighborhoods surrounding this particular a longer or a linear stretch of cycling. I would rather choose a neighborhood and look at creating a larger network of cycle tracks rather than looking at a specific road which is going a long length. But I think the idea of doing this particular project was also not just behavior per se, which of course was addressed in the smaller nuances. It could be, let's say, the key areas where the crossings happen, the key areas where the cycle tracks start, or the necessary infrastructure, or the way even we decide where the cycle lane has to be put in the service road, either it's towards the right or towards the left. So it did sort of include those kind of decisions which had to be taken. But I think the other bigger chunk which also we had to consider was the users themselves, right? So here there was a huge necessity, or rather the folks who were cycling to these IT parks were also functioning as the primary users, because they were cycling in large numbers along the stretch. And this of course was these of course, were the numbers before pandemic, which had a drastic downfall, but we aim to sort of do something even for the future, post pandemic as well. And we see the numbers rising recently. But because there was a need that, there were a lot of IT parks who were located along this entire linear stretch, we decided we will start with this particular stretch as the trunk line, but of course establish a bigger cycling district in the area to say that this can be scaled up towards creating smaller looped networks which adjoin to this particular trunk route. So to just summarize, my answer was the idea of behavior definitely is taken care of when we put the necessary infrastructure in place, but it also has to be sort of balanced out with other parameters which exist on site, and then see what is the best combination which works out for these kind of proposals.
Thank you, Rajiv. I think I understand that this is how we usually kind of consider the psychology. Sometimes it is also about considering the user perception and what sort of service we can do or have done around that. And I think I'm going to actually move to Sonal Kulkarni. And Sonal, one question to you is that there is a question that an audience has asked, that there is a large segment of working population who cycle out of economic necessity. How are their routes or requirements incorporated when you had? So I understand that there is a crowdsourcing of information, but there's also a flip side to that. That technology access is also a restricted access. There is a technology bias already that is being discussed about in various forums. So I'm just a little curious on that what sort of surveys did you really, or are you planning to, was it really done, or is it in the pipeline, or is it really a consideration at all in the whole conversation of NMT story?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Prerna. And just to let you know, actually, we started off a livelihood cyclist survey spanning across the city of Bangalore with a partner of ours called the BPAC, Bangalore Political Action Committee. And the report has just been completed, and we're going to release it next week. And as you said, like we also had this thing that we are crowdsourcing from people who can actually give out these routes, but we don't know the cycle travel patterns of the livelihood cyclists. So that's why we took up this whole initiative to go ahead and do this kind of a survey. And interestingly, we found that the livelihood cyclists actually don't actually ask for infrastructure. What they're asking for is better lighting, because they actually travel at very, very odd times. They travel either really early in the morning or like very late in the evenings. So that's what actually was a very, very good insight for us, that these cyclists actually don't really depend on infrastructure. Whether or not infrastructure is there, they're going to cycle because that's the only mode that they can use. So this report will be out soon, and people can take a look at it. It will be on our website. So yeah.
That's really great, Sonal, to know, because this is something that usually we don't see this sort of study or this sort of survey that is, and I'm glad that Bengaluru has taken a step forward. And I think it is also learning for other cities, because they have been questioning, if we want to kind of include this or do this and strengthen this, how do we go about doing it? So I think you start there and you start understanding the necessity. It's sort of a need-based assessment, that you need to understand your city and the ecosystem and the priorities that the user groups have. So I think that's we're looking forward to look at that study definitely. And with this, I'm going to kind of go back to Ashwati. Ashwati, I know IDDP has been doing work around streets and bettering streets across the country for a very, very long time. You have launched several challenges: cycles for change, streets for people, and then there are more that are upcoming. I'm just wondering, now this is one challenge, which is a time-bound situation. That's one, limitation with the challenges. How do we kind of mainstream this, going forward, that so that, even if there is no challenge, then there is still that sort of, consideration while doing city development. And how does the role of collaboration of different agencies, how can it prove to be more fruitful while making this conversation more comprehensive, or let's say making it more making it institutionalized, making it as a way of life of sorts, and not just one challenge and then move to another challenge just to keep that thing going. How do we institutionalize this?
Sure, Prerna, that's a very, very, very relevant question. So we've been working, like you said, in multiple cities across, in fact, decades. But there hasn't been the kind of uptake for walking and cycling that you'd really want to see. And so the challenge was just an opportunity to sort of ignite the interest in cities across the country at a very quick pace. So, we've heard about Bangalore, we've heard about Chennai, we can hear about Mumbai, Mumbai, Pune, Delhi. But what happens to Surat and Rajkot and Kohima and Kota and Udaipur, how are we going to sort of transform all of those cities as well? So the challenge idea was that, Sonal speaking about leadership plays such an important role. And what we realized is that when the national government sort of ignites this or shares this challenge, which gets cities to sort of learn from each other, but also compete with each other and take action, there seemed to be a very quick uptake of this, saying that, okay, there is, there is a direction that is being shown by the national government, and let's see what is it that we can take and what is it that we can explore. So that's what we've seen, and that's what we think has been the role of the national government, to sort of inspire and encourage cities to take action. And here again, I would, really shout out to DALT, because while we've seen cities across the country doing a lot of action, we noticed that Karnataka had a bunch of cities that was taking action, and this was largely because of the leadership and DALT encouraging these cities to take that action and guiding them both technically and otherwise as well, including giving them finances where necessary. So there is a role for the national government to play in terms of inspiring cities. There's a role for the state government to play in sort of, encouraging them to take the next steps, but the action happens at the city level. And it is for the cities to take that action, and where it's been successful. So again, coming to Bangalore, the reason why Bangalore has been so successful is because there's WRI supporting them on ground, there's DALT, there is the bicycle mayor, there are a whole group of other non-profits who are coming together to support the city. We cannot make this transformation alone. Our only way, I would repeat this n number of times, the only way we can do this transformation is through collaboration between multiple organizations. And wherever we work, we've seen that when there are these collaborators on ground, those cities have really shown a lot of transformation. Of course, the question, this challenge is not going to, go ahead for years. It is going to come to an end. And what we have tried to look at is, that's the reason why we are encouraging cities to create these policies. We're encouraging cities to create these walking, cells and committees with all of these local partners. So, when the committee is created, ITDP is not in that committee, but a committee in DALT or in Bangalore would have WRI and DALT as being the bicycle mayor as being those leading committee members. At the end, it is the champions in the city who's going to make those change. And what we are trying to do as catalysts is creating that institutional structure that will allow for change to happen in the long term. What we're doing right now is igniting this interest, and we hope that through the processes that we're setting up, there would be a sustainable future of transformation in our cities across the country.
Thank you, Ashpati. And I think that's very well put. Coming back to you, Sonal, I wanted to kind of end the panel with you. Basically, we have been, one of the important questions that has been popping in my mind is that, whatever examples that we hear about the initiatives that India is taking, largely concentrating in the southern cities of India. I don't know if that is correct or not, or it is just my perception. But what I hear is it is Karnataka, it is Bengaluru, it is Chennai. Cities down south are really leading this way. How do we kind of ignite the similar passion in cities in north, in west, in east, and especially east? And I know a couple of cities in northern India have, Haryana, a couple of cities in Haryana state has taken up certain very interesting initiatives, but this is not yet mainstream. If you talk about mainstreaming, this is not really mainstream. And how do we kind of also nudge the whole behavioral change in people, while trying to, put out, a lot of times what we face is that, when we speak in such forums, it's a mutual acceptance on certain things. How do we go put it out to masses? How do we bring them on board? What could be some of the important steps that cities can really take? And and I know that cities are, we have been working with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs very closely on climate smart cities assessments, and we realize that cities are actually grappling how to start, where to start. So I think if you can kind of, in your experience, if you can share that, how we should go about doing this and mainstreaming this whole conversation.
Yeah, I'll start with the second one, which is on behavior change. And I have some thoughts on the first. The one thing is that our Indian cities already have medium to high non-motorized NMT mode shares, right? So the behavior change is there. I think there's no behavior change required. Behavior is there. Infrastructure has to change, right? So, and I think that's the key piece to remember. And I think I'm just going to bring another thing, and perhaps as someone who works fairly strongly at the intersection of gender and mobility as well. A majority of pedestrians in our cities are actually women. And, when we talk about cycling, right, we don't talk about cycling for women enough. I don't think we talk about it. So when we do user surveys, let's remember women are a very small percentage of users. And if your users are saying, don't create safe infrastructure, I think this is going to be a bit problematic, right? Because there's enough research that is telling us that some of the limitations, and I think Ashwati also pointed this out, around thinking about increasing cycling shares for women, which you could use as a way to increase cycling shares overall, access to bicycles, safer road infrastructure, both in terms of cycle tracks, traffic calming, street lighting, etc. We know these should teaching them how to cycle, and also creating cycling groups for maintenance, etc. Right? So I think we should really look at how we can deliberately and pointedly, targetedly increase women cyclists in our cities, right? And I think that might be the first big jump. So to me, that behavior change can really happen. In terms of, I don't know about north-south, but what we are seeing currently is that our cities, many cities at different scales are implementing metro rail infrastructure, right? And I think one of the first things that we can do in order to leverage this investment is to ensure that we have good NMT infrastructure along with this public transport infrastructure that is being built. Because then to me, that is going to be not dependent on northern cities or southern cities, but any city that wants to build metro rail infrastructure. I think that can be one major lever. I still think, and I'll probably kind of say this, is that we definitely and certainly need to see more leadership from the national government as far as financing for non-motorized transport is concerned. I think that kind of leadership, both particularly in terms of financing, really needs to happen. And I think that could be a game changer in that.
Great. Thank you so much. I think this was one of the most awaited panel as far as I'm concerned. And I think, you guys have really done a wonderful job for this. Thank you so much for joining us today. And I think we are just in time. And what I'm going to also now do is invite an IUA to take a feedback very quickly. And also to mention that this is the last session for this particular series. And I think we've had some interesting conversations. We will be circling back. And what I want to put out is that as far as this conversation of alternate mobility is concerned, I think cities are still kind of struggling to develop first the plans and then second the operationalization of those plans. And I think in this particular forum, and I can say that, this is the kind of support these cities would need, and sort of hand-holding of sorts when it comes to the technical understanding of what is required, what are the critical levers, how they can, really leverage certain collaborations, and how they can bring a continued financing and backing to the initiatives that they intend to take but are struggling with. And I think professionals on the platform are available to kind of help and handhold cities. So with this, I'm going to request Manjari from NIUA to take over for the feedback. And we don't have much participation today, but this particular session is being recorded and will be sent out to a very, very large audience. And I hope that the cities will benefit from this conversation. And Manjari, over to you.
Thanks, Prerna. We can have a quick feedback round. I'm going to put, am I audible?
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Great. So I'm going to quickly put the Mentimeter code on the chat box. So I would request the participants to please log on to www.menti.com and use the code given in the chat box, which is 73380-511, or there is a link mentioned in the chat box as well. So you could directly use the link to access the Menti screen. Please let me know if my screen is visible.
Yes, it is.
Great. So requesting the participants to please log on to menti.com and use the code given on the screen, which is 73380-511. Or you can directly use the link given in the chat box to access the Menti screen directly. Maybe we can wait a couple of seconds for the participants to join us. So I hope the participants have logged on to menti.com. And so we can start with the first question. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the best, how would you rate the session on the following parameters? With the relevance and usefulness of the content of today's session, ease of understanding, and the question answer session at the end, which just happened, and the interaction with the speakers. Great. I think we have a couple of answers here. Moving on to the next question. What are your key takeaways from the session, from today's session? This is a short answer type question. So maybe the participants can drop in a sentence or two or a few words based on your takeaways from today's session. Great. I think we can see a couple of answers on the screen. Bengaluru being a great example. Mass awareness is required. Leadership is the key. A great understanding of international, national, and city-wise approach is required. Okay, it's clashing with Connect Karo. All right, so I think we have a couple of good answers here. So moving on to the next question, which is any other suggestion which the participants would like to give us to enhance the e-learning series experience. This would be relevant for us to conduct the future sessions. Again, a short answer type question, so you can drop in a few words or a sentence. All right, we would keep in mind that the events will not be clashing in future. Compile products and case studies, noted. Great. So I think we have a couple of answers here. So I think that was the last question regarding the feedback. So I would now request Prerna to close the session. Thank you so much. Over to you, Prerna.
Thank you, Manjari. So this is, thank you, everyone. I would, before we part ways, I would request Vaishnavi Shankar to, if she's around and she can, join us. This is the last session we're closing today. This has been a great collaboration with the NIUA and several partners, across the 10-part series. And I think, Vaishnavi, I'm going to, leave the forum to you to close. Thank you so much for the continued support that you guys have provided. And this has been an incredible journey for us.
Thanks, Prerna. It's the same for us. I think when we started discussing about the learning series, we didn't know it's going to come to this end over here. So it's been an interesting journey with different topics that we've covered. And of course, like Prerna said, we've recorded all of these sessions. We'll try and disseminate it further to make sure that it reaches a lot more people, because the discussions and some of the case studies that have been discussed are very, very useful, not just for the cities, but for other professionals as well who are working in cities. So yeah, very happy to have done this collaboration, and we'll try and disseminate this information further. Thank you very much for all the speakers and the other partners who've been part of this particular series as well. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. With this we are going to end the conversation. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Prerna.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.